Good evening, and welcome to the 2019 Cal Poly Veritas Forum. My name is Michael Hansen. I'm a third-year mechanical engineering student, and I have the privilege of kicking off tonight's event. I hope you all enjoy the evening. First of all, I'd like to thank you all for joining us. You make this event worthwhile, and I would like to thank the sponsors that made this event possible, including Atheists United SLO, Cal Poly ASI, the Cal Poly Veritas Forum, and a special thanks to the Alliance of Happy Atheists. They're a club on campus, and they played a big role in choosing the topic and the speakers for tonight. So I think they deserve a round of applause. The word Veritas in the title of our event is a Latin word for truth, and so our goal tonight will be to pursue truth together. Our speakers will not be debating, but instead leading us in discussion. And to that end, we have asked them to share personally, ask honest questions of each other, and lead us in the type of discussion we can continue tonight and moving forward. You can enter that discussion through asking questions. You can do this on a platform called Slido. You can download the app or go to slido.com and enter the event code that is on the screen. The event code will be up throughout the night, and so you can go to that. And from that platform, you can post your questions, view the questions asked by the people around you, and like the questions you think are most interesting. We'll do our best to get the most popular ones to the speakers, but if your question is not asked, both speakers will be in the lobby following the discussion, and you can talk to them personally. The last order of business before we get things going are the survey cards you got on the way in. The Veritas Forum strives to put on the best events possible, and you can help us do that by filling out the top half of the front side. So that's the gray section underneath the logo. So if you would join me in filling out the top half of the front side now. Thanks for filling those out. If you don't have a pen or a pencil, we have some in the lobby. You can do it afterwards as well. But you can give those to any of the people in red shirts. They will collect them after the discussion. We thank you for helping us with that. Finally, I'd like to emphasize that tonight's goal is not to find quick answers, but instead to face difficult questions. So I hope you all join in the conversation. With that, I'd like to invite up Dr. Stephen Lloyd Moffitt, Professor of Religious Studies in the Philosophy Department here at Cal Poly. He will be introducing our speakers and hosting tonight's event.
Great. So I'm Steve Lloyd Moffitt. I run the Religious Studies program and the Religious Studies minors who may be out there. I also have the pleasure of introducing our topic and our speakers. And I want to begin with a little thought experiment. So behind me, shortly, will be an image that I can make happen at some point. It will be an image of Göbekli Tepe, which is the oldest human-created structure that was ever made. I know it looks a little bit like a structure from Poly Canyon Architectural Graveyard in the summer, but it is actually the oldest human structure. And it was a temple dedicated to the spirits and the gods of what is now southern Turkey. We think it was built around 10 to 12,000 years ago when humans had yet to settle into villages, but were still hunters and gatherers. And if you think about that, before we created places to sleep or to eat together or to play together, we created places to worship together. When humans finally figured out how to use the stone and the chisel to build something, we did it to please the gods, not to please ourselves. And your great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-grandparents at some point sat down and thought about the relationship between religion and society. And so tonight, one way we can frame it is a little thought experiment worthy of a Black Mirror episode. That is, what if religion did not play a role in our human experience for the last 10,000 years? What if Göbekli Tepe never existed and we could imagine a world where religion and society had not done its journey together? Would it be better or would it be worse? How would it be different? And do we need it still today? Another way to think through Göbekli Tepe is that our speakers tonight are going to be speaking about literally the oldest and most important questions humans have ever asked each other. And so we want to thank the Veritas Forum for inviting us to be a part of this great conversation and for bringing out two amazing people, flying them both from the East Coast in order to share their wisdom with us. So as Jeff would say, let's give these speakers a big Cal Poly welcome. And here's the format for tonight. I'm going to introduce each one of them individually, and they will give a 15-minute reflection upon the themes of tonight. And then we'll have about 20 minutes of me asking them questions and having a conversation. And then we will turn to our Slido-directed questions, and you will get to ask your questions through that app. And then we will duel outside or something. Okay, our first speaker is Dr. Herb Silverman, who is a distinguished emeritus mathematics professor at the College of Charleston, the founder of the Secular Coalition for America, the founder of the Secularist Humanists of the Low Country, founder of the Atheist Humanist Alliance student group at the College of Charleston, and recipient of the American Humanist Lifetime Achievement Award. Herb ran for governor in 1990 to challenge the provision of the South Carolina state constitution that prohibited atheists from holding public office. After an 8-year battle, Herb won a unanimous decision from the South Carolina Supreme Court, striking down the religious test requirement. He didn't win the election, but he has written for the Washington Post, the Huffington Post, the Humanist, and Free Inquiry. He's also been a frequent debater, including a recent one at Oxford on Does American Religion Undermine American Values? Herb's books include Candidate Without a Prayer, an autobiography of a Jewish atheist in the Bible Belt, and An Atheist Stranger in a Strange Religious Land, which he points out are both going to be for sale afterwards, and he takes check or cash. With that, let's invite Herb to share some thoughts.
Thank you so much for that wonderful introduction, and I'd really like to thank Veritas for inviting me and for holding such forums. Too often, we only listen to those who believe as we do, and it's good to go outside of our comfort zones. So on the topic, would society be better off without religion? Get ready to hear some bad things about religion. Though I don't think religion is all bad, and later I'll even mention some good things about religion. But I'll begin with a quote from Nobel Prize-winning physicist Steven Weinberg. With or without religion, you would have good people doing good things and bad people doing bad things. But for good people to do bad things, that takes religion. And I'll illustrate with 3 examples, one old, one current, and one personal. Mark Twain said his mother was a good person who accepted slavery because she learned from sermons that slavery was God's will. Perhaps in his novel, Huckleberry Finn, Mark Twain channeled his mother when Finn rejected the Christian values he was taught and resigned himself to eternal damnation for rescuing Jim from slavery, saying, "All right then, I'll go to hell." Today, we mostly agree that it's abominable for one person to own another. One of the current disputes involves religious challenges to LGBT rights. I saw a movie last month called Boy Erased, based on a true story by Garrett Conley. He came from a loving family, but as a teenager was outed as gay. His parents then told him to participate in an intense Christian conversion therapy program from gay to straight, or be disowned by his family. After being shamed, humiliated, and tormented in the program, he came to terms with being gay. His parents finally accepted him as he is, in part because they did not want to lose their son. That's another example of good people doing bad things because of religion. Now, here's something I have in common with Dr. Pryor. I've been called demon-possessed because I'm an atheist, but a Christian theologian wrote an article titled, "Is Karen Swallow Pryor Demon-Possessed?" This theologian believed there could be no better explanation for why she endorses LGBTism in the name of reconciliation. He said that rebellion against such an abominable sin is precisely what Jesus intended, quoting Matthew 10:34, "I came not to bring peace, but a sword." I'm happy, Karen, that you either ignore or reinterpret Scripture so that you can be supportive of LGBTism. And I most certainly don't believe that you're demon-possessed. Now, for a personal example. A few years ago, I was invited to give a secular humanist invocation at a city council meeting in Charleston, South Carolina. But as the mayor introduced me, half the council members walked out because they knew I was an atheist. Those who stayed thought my invocation was inclusive and reasonable. One councilman justified the walkout by quoting Psalm 14. "The fool says in his heart, there is no God. They are corrupt. Their deeds are vile. There is not one who does good." He then told me that the walkout was not personal. In other words, his religious beliefs obliged him to demonize an entire class of people he was elected to represent. Lots of individuals use religion to validate bad actions. We all know folks who describe how moral they are because they follow God's law, which often compels them to be anti-science and to discriminate and take away basic human rights from others. Some religious and political leaders regularly claim to know God's presidential candidate. But we're a secular country, not a theocracy, and politicians should be able to give good secular arguments for their positions, not divisive sectarian ones. That's why separation of religion and government is so essential. People are free to practice their religious beliefs, but not to impose those beliefs on others. We hear religious conservatives say that without faith in God, society would fall apart, and secularism is a major danger to societal well-being. But when such claims are measured, we find a strong negative correlation between religiosity and quality of life. The most religious states in our country, like Mississippi, Alabama, Louisiana, South Carolina, are among the worst in homicide, violent crime, poverty, education, child abuse, racism, sexually transmitted disease, teen pregnancy, while the least religious states are among the best. Such correlations also hold internationally, where quality of life is better in the least religious countries. Now, as a math professor, I've taught that correlation does not necessarily prove causation. But I think we have some strong indicators that society would be better off with less overt religiosity. There are countless religions in the world with contradictory dogmas, including over 33,000 Christian denominations. Ever wonder, among all the conflicting faith beliefs, how people decide on the one correct religion? As it turns out, there's a remarkable coincidence. The overwhelming majority choose the religion of their parents. I learned to believe in the biblical God, Yahweh, not Jesus. Why? Because I was born into a Jewish family. Had I been born into a Christian family, I'd likely have believed that Jesus is Lord. The majority of Asians are Buddhists, Indians primarily Hindu, Saudi Arabians Muslim, and here in America, mostly Christian. Religious belief is based more on geography than on theology. For me, the question about whether society would be better off without religion comes down to how we make moral and ethical decisions. Many atheists like me, who don't believe in any gods, also identify as secular humanists. An elevator definition of secular humanists is good without any gods. We're committed to the application of reason, science, and evidence. We believe that ethical values are derived from human needs and interests and are tested and refined by experience. We're part of a natural world, the result of unguided evolutionary change. We don't credit a deity for our accomplishments or blame satanic forces when we behave badly. We take personal responsibility for our actions. We need ongoing discussions about how to more effectively minimize suffering, maximize happiness, and promote human dignity. Reasonable people may disagree on the right thing to do in a situation, but I think a secular morality based on the consequences of our actions to individuals, our families, and our communities is a better guideline than a morality based on unsupported supernatural demands. Some religious believers feel we should rely exclusively on doctrines written when democracy was non-existent and kings ruled by divine right. Ancient scriptures have been used to justify holy wars, slavery, misogyny, anti-Semitism, executing blasphemers and homosexuals, burning witches and heretics, and genocides. Fortunately, even those who believe in scriptural inerrancy often interpret some passages differently than in past centuries, more consistent with secular humanist principles. Morality needs some flexibility because our society learns what works better, which includes discarding unconditional religious prohibitions against so-called sexual sins like masturbation, contraception, unmarried sex, and same-sex relationships. Even if we believe in moral absolutes, we're forced to make human judgments on how to interpret them. For instance, we all agree that murder is wrong, but what to do about euthanasia, suicide, abortion, war, capital punishment, stem cell research? Different religions, and even people within the same religion, often clash. Many insist that an all-powerful God requires a particular form of worship or else, and these divine commands are absolutely more important than secular virtues like tolerance, compassion, and reason. Unfortunately, love of a God all too often makes people less loving of their fellow human beings. One biblical character, Abraham, is revered as a prophet in all three monotheistic religions, Judaism, Christianity, and Islam. Abraham is a role model because he had such great faith that he was willing to murder his innocent son because he believed God told him to do so. Sadly, throughout history, people inspired by their holy books have also believed that God commanded them to commit atrocities against infidels. We can make up needs of an imagined God, but we know the needs of real individuals. Now, as promised, here's what I think are some positives about religion. If loving and worshiping a God inspires you to treat others fairly, that's great. Religion can provide a sense of community and purpose, encourage good works and charity, and lead people to become more caring neighbors and citizens. Some biblical wisdom is certainly worth keeping, like love your neighbor and don't murder, steal, or lie. But these practices are necessary for the survival of any culture, with or without religion. Just about all religions and secular philosophies have grounded morality in some version of the golden rule. The good values a religion promotes are human values, not specific to any particular religion. There are, of course, faith beliefs that console religious people, but not atheists. For instance, life can be unfair, and fear of death can lead to a longing for an afterlife where people can be united with their loved ones in eternal bliss, or perhaps come back reincarnated as a better person. Many believe they've had personal experiences with a God who guides them, and that can be quite comforting and reassuring, though I might regard such experiences as examples of confirmation bias. It's important to distinguish between the world as we know it and the world as we'd like it to be. So here's my bottom line. If you're happy with your religious beliefs, treat people kindly and don't force your beliefs on others. That's fine with me. More fundamental than which religion folks practice are which passages in their holy books they emphasize. Social justice and love, or a fire and brimstone God who insists that everyone follow the one true religion with a capital T, and any deviation carries catastrophic consequences. Since we don't actually know what lies beyond, we should focus on improving conditions here on earth to make our society better. Our dogmas should never override our compassion. We may differ about a future life, but atheists, Christians, and others can work together on concerns that matter in this life, like human rights, racial discrimination, the environment, poverty, peace, and other social justice issues. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Silverman. And we can see his stump speech was probably electrifying a few years ago. Our second speaker is Dr. Karen Swallow Pryor. She received her PhD from the State University of New York, Buffalo. She's an award-winning professor of English at Liberty University. She's the author of Booked Literature in the Soul of Me and Fierce Convictions, The Extraordinary Life of Hannah More, the poet, reformer, and abolitionist, as well as On Reading Well, Finding the Good Life Through Great Books. She has written for Christianity Today, The Atlantic, The Washington Post, First Things, Vox, Think Christians, and the Gospel Coalition. She is a research fellow with the Ethics and Religious Liberty Commission of the Southern Baptist Convention, a senior fellow with the Liberty University Center for Apologetics and Cultural Engagement, a senior fellow with the Trinity Forum, and a member of the Faith Advisory Council of the Humane Society of the United States. So I'm not sure if that's about the faith of dogs or the faith in dogs. But with that, I would like to welcome Dr. Pryor to the podium.
Well, I come here tonight and I live my life, in fact, in pursuit of truth. And like Herb, I believe that tonight's question is a question about truth. Unlike Herb, I believe that the answer to the question, is the world better off without religion, is no. In particular, I think that religion, like the word philosophy, is too broad a term, but I definitely believe that we are not better off without Christianity. I could make a range of arguments in defense of this claim. I could tell you that far from being the sworn enemy of science, Christian belief made the scientific revolution possible because of its understanding that nature was created by and subject to a free and rational God. I could tell you that far from being detrimental to care for the weak and the vulnerable, Christianity has had an immeasurable impact on how we treat the poor and the sick, including the foundation of hospitals, orphanages, and shelters. I could tell you that today in North America, regular service attenders donate 3.5 times more money than their non-religious counterparts per year and volunteer twice as much, and that religious participation is linked with lower rates of offenses for dozens of crimes. I could tell you that attending religious services has been shown to have a significant positive impact on our physical and mental health, even to the extent of reducing mortality rates by 20 to 30% over a 15-year period. And I could tell you that Christian belief in the power of the written word led to widespread literacy across the world and to the establishment of many of the world's first universities. Or I could tell you that it was Christians who were the first to question the institution of slavery that had existed for thousands of years and who led the fight to see its end. To be sure, Christians have committed terrible wrongs of cruelty and ignorance. As a Christian who believes in what the Bible calls sin, I make no claim of moral high ground. But if we take an impartial look at the data, the atheist claim that we are simply better off without Christianity is hard to defend. But even so, this data is not the greatest reason why I believe we aren't better off without religion. I believe we are not better off without Christianity in particular because, again, I believe Christianity is true. And if it's not true, then, to quote a favorite writer of mine, Flannery O'Connor, as she once said about communion, to hell with it. I want to touch on 3 signposts that lead me to believe that Christianity is true. They are truth, beauty, and goodness. And then I'll just share a little bit of my own story. The most compelling fact that neither naturalism or atheism can answer, as far as I understand, is the basic fact that human beings, unlike any other forms of existence, are even capable of comprehending truth, goodness, and beauty. This quality of humanity is, for me, the most compelling evidence that there is something about our human essence that goes beyond naturalistic explanations. To me, the most reasonable explanation is for the further fact that not only can we comprehend these things, that we actually desire them, is that we are made in the likeness of the one who is the source of all these. Theism in general and Christianity in particular are not only about belief, though belief is certainly important, they are also about desire, the desire to seek truth, goodness, and beauty, and not only in ourselves, but in their ultimate source, which is outside of ourselves. Of course, today, even the very notion of truth is contested ground. Modernists like Herb claim that truth is contained in and verifiable by science. Postmodernists claim that the very notion of truth is a mere construction of language. Yet we all know, deep down inside, that we yearn for truth, whether it's the truth about history, the truth about science, the truth about religion, the truth about a relationship. I believe that God is the ultimate source of truth, and that he has revealed that truth to us through both natural and supernatural revelation. Now, for me, as an English professor, books are a little bit of both, natural and supernatural revelation. They're scientific, they're tangible, they exist, and they're a little bit magical too. As a lover of books, I delight in the Christian doctrine that God has revealed himself through his written word, which is complete and perfect, though in our human finitude, we interpret and apply imperfectly. But just as scientists strive to understand the laws of physical reality, err and try again, so Christians try to understand and apply the will of God, err and try again. And if you think about it, even the very notion of truth cannot exist apart from language. Language is required to conceive of truth, pursue it, and express it. And again, as an English professor, one of the most compelling things about Christianity is that it is so word and logocentric. Logos is the Greek word that means, among other things, logical, orderly, rational. Logos is the concept that underlines all form and all meaning. It also happens to be, not coincidentally, one of the names for Jesus Christ. John's gospel begins with this astonishing statement about Jesus. In the beginning was the Word was with God, and the Word was God. And in the Greek, that word for word is logos. This verse echoes the creation narrative of Genesis 1:1, which reveals God as speaking the world into existence with his words. Now, there is within Orthodox Christianity a range of interpretations for how literally to take the Genesis account. Contrary to popular belief, it is not true that Christians always took the creation accounts in Genesis literally before scientists came along in the 19th, 18th, 17th centuries and burst their ignorant little bubble. We see a range of interpretations from Christian theologians as early as the 4th century. But this variety actually confirms the power and reliability of Christianity as a word-centered religion. For language is rich, layered, and resonant with meaning. Written language, as well as, I think, the language of mathematics, which I can't speak much about, but is symbolic. Understanding symbols is unique to human beings, another form of evidence of an essential nature that is distinct from all other animals, of our being made in the image of the kind of God who creates through words. The Judeo-Christian God reveals himself through the word, spoken, written, and incarnate, tangible, and externalized. From the stone tablets carved on Sinai, to the handwritten canon of the books of the Bible, to the digitizing of those words on your phone, he is a God who asks his people to know him not through images, chants, rituals, or magic stones, but through his words. An image, idol, or totem cannot be declared a truth or a lie, but the language of proposition can be. A God bold enough to proclaim himself in words that can be handed down and reproduced from generation to generation, words each of us has the opportunity to affirm or deny for ourselves, is the kind of God who gets my attention. And the words God offers to humanity about salvation are clear. We have all rejected God and chosen to live in selfish rebellion against the God who made us. In Jesus Christ, God became human so that he might die in our place and reconcile us to himself by his death on the cross. And on the third day, Jesus rose again from the dead, defeating death forever and bringing us new life if we will accept this offer of salvation. Death, as the poet John Milton said, thou shalt die. One can ignore, disbelieve, or accept these words, but they are clear. And what about goodness? Human beings are the only living things who have a moral nature, who are capable of knowing good and evil and of imagining things like justice, equality, death, grace, and eternity. However, the evidence that humans are capable of being good or good enough on their own, or even capable of creating a coherent, sustainable, universal moral order, let alone live up to it, is too thin to put much faith in that idea. Although we do have enough goodness, another way we as humans reflect God's image, that we do, unlike other animals, mourn the suffering that we see in the world or the suffering that we experience ourselves. And we all long for ultimate justice in response to such suffering. It is reasonable to believe that if we desire justice, we were made to find and reflect a source of pure justice, such as God. Yet as much as the concepts of truth and justice point us to a creator of them who is outside of the created order, for me, it is actually beauty that suggests even more the existence of an eternal, transcendent source of beauty. The art, songs, poetry, and stories that human beings create have no more reasonable explanation, I think, than a creator who gave humans and humans alone these abilities, these creative abilities. Evolution offers no evidence of anything remotely like this imaginative ability in any other animals. And it was in literature, in fact, that my own faith in God became real, and it continues to be in literature, as well as in the beauty of art and nature and language, that God is most evident. I think, for example, of the opening lines from a poem by Mary Oliver, who just died a couple of weeks ago. The poem is called I Wake Close to Morning, and the opening lines are these. Why do people keep asking to see God's identity papers when the darkness opening into morning is more than enough? I asked Jesus into my heart before I was 5 years old, but it was many years before I asked him into my mind. In fairness to myself, it was a long time before I realized that my mind was a place where Jesus wanted and needed to be. Matthew's gospel records Jesus as saying, "Love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your mind." But for much of my life, I thought I had to choose between the life of the mind and the life of faith. In fact, I thought for a long time the life of the mind was incompatible with a life of deep faith, and I thought I might be better off without religion. I relied on my own intellect and reason to create a system of morality that made sense to me. I decided I loved literature more than I loved God, and lived that way until I realized that a God who spoke the world into existence with words is, in fact, the source of meaning of all words. And it doesn't matter how literally one takes this, the essence of it makes more sense to me than anything in the world. For a long time, I thought my love of books was taking me away from God, but as it turns out, books were the backwoods path back to God, bramble-filled and broken, but full of truth and wonder and goodness and beauty. My relationship with God has been more intellectual than emotional. I used to think this lack of emotional fervor was a mark of sin, or at the very least, some great flaw in my spiritual life. I thought that it must be a great lack in my faith that I become more emotionally moved in reading literary works like Great Expectations, Madame Bovary, and Jane Eyre than in reading dramatic passages in the Bible or hearing a moving sermon from the pulpit. But I've come to realize that my emotional responses to moving works of literature are the only way I can bear to respond emotionally to God and his love, indirectly. It's like in the Old Testament, when Moses asked God to see his glory, and God answered, "You cannot see my face, for man shall not see me and live." So God took Moses to the cleft of a rock and covered him with his hand while his glory passed by. One Bible scholar notes about this passage that the Lord's goodness withheld what Moses could not bear and revealed all that he could. To respond emotionally to God directly is more than I can bear. So God in his goodness has bestowed the gifts of literature and art and beauty. Literature is like the cleft of a rock that God has taken me to, a place from which I can experience as much of the glory of God as I can endure. Great literature and all art, all truth, all goodness allow me, like Moses, to see the back of God. So back to our question, are we better off without religion? I know from experience that I am not. And I think the evidence suggests the same for all of us. Thank you.
Okay. Well, there we go. It's okay. No, it's okay. So we're at the second stage of our evening, and this is the Oprah Winfrey Show time, where we have a conversation. And I want to start off with just some biographical questions for you. You both have spent a lot of your time and energy dedicated to your respective positions. I'm wondering, can you think of a time in your life when you were unsure of your positions? And can you think through the moment or series of moments that led you to be more firmly on your current path? Was there a moment where you found the certainty to fly across country and stand up in front of 1,000 people for your position? Why don't we, since we started off with Herb before, why don't we start off with you, Dr. Pryor?
Okay. Well, no, I still haven't found that confidence in flying across the country to speak about these things, but here I am. Well, I mentioned it a little bit in the opening. I mean, I really thought growing up as I did in kind of rural, backwoods, country churches, where the life of the mind was not talked about and the do's and the don'ts were, and, you know, my youth minister burned his rock records, and that sort of thing. I just thought, this is not, like, this is not for me. And so I just pursued the life of the mind and literature, but it was actually not until I was in grad school, till I was in my PhD program, and one of my professors, who was not a believer, and he was quite liberal and quite shocking to me in many ways, but he introduced me to John Milton, whom I quoted from, and into the whole history in earlier Christianity that supported free speech, free inquiry, and the life of the mind. And then I realized this is my heritage, this is my Christian heritage, and I became an evangelist for Christian intellect, the Christian intellect. So.
Actually, maybe following up on it, you know, Herb mentioned that if he had been born into a Christian family, he might have been Christian. If he was born into a Buddhist family, he might have been Buddhist. Do you feel the same way?
Yeah, I do. I mean, I think culture matters. I think family matters. And I think that our choices have consequences for generation upon generation upon generation, for good or ill. And God also created culture. I mean, if he just wanted to create human beings and have us spend eternity with him, which he does, but if he wanted that right away, then we would have skipped this part. And I don't completely understand why we have this part here on earth and in culture and in families and in society and in presidential elections, because so much of it's better off to be avoided. But here we are. I think this earthly existence and our bodies matter, and our families matter, and there's something for us to learn and grow from in that.
God gave us the Jenner family to make sense of, challenge us.
There you go.
So, Dr. Silverman, it says you grew up with a Jewish family. Mm-hmm. What led you to bear the "I'm your friendly neighborhood atheist" shirt?
Well, it was not just an ordinary Jewish family. It was actually Orthodox Jewish, which is the most stringent kind. That was my grandparents. My parents were more, I suppose, cultural Jews whose idea of Judaism was anti-Semitism, because it was some of our family members died in the Holocaust. And we were brought up to not trust Goyim, that's Gentiles, not to even associate with them. Gradually, I started thinking, reading the Bible, what makes sense and what doesn't. I was becoming more logical and and being a mathematician, or starting to be interested in that. And I decided I'm going to keep the ethical and moral parts of the Torah that we learned, but I didn't really need the ritual sort of things and the things that didn't make sense to me. Pretty soon, God stopped making sense to me too, so I didn't even know that I was an atheist. I just heard that connected with communism somehow, till I went to a library and read the one book on atheism in the library, Bertrand Russell's Why I Am Not a Christian. And I said, hey, that's me too. So I didn't even tell my family. I was just a quiet atheist, and it just didn't mean much to me, just like I was a round earther, but I didn't have to talk about it, because most people, when I went off to graduate school, were probably also atheists. It was only when I moved to South Carolina and I saw how important religion was. First thing you're asked is, what religion are you? And I know some people, if they say they're not religious, their kids are not even allowed to play with the kids of good Christian people. But I still was mostly an academic, not engaged with atheism at all, until I found out atheists are not allowed to hold public office. And as a white heterosexual male, I felt I was engaged in civil rights, but for other people, not for me. Then it became a civil rights issue for me. And when I was running for governor and had the anti-atheist comments, I also found out that those who were anti-atheist were also anti-African American, anti-gay, and all the other things that I was working for. And that became a passion for me, atheism as a civil rights issue, which leads me to fly across country for this wonderful conversation we're having.
Now, Dr. Parr, you over dinner were talking about an event that happened last year in your life. Do you want to share that and how that shaped your faith and your public statements about it?
Sure. And I know Herb will just say this is just me, finding consolation. But last year, less than a year ago, in May, I was had flown halfway across the country to go to a conference, and was walking across the street in downtown, and got hit by a bus. And ended up at Vanderbilt Hospital for 8 days with cracked spine, cracked ribs, cracked shoulder, cracked pelvis, head wounds, collapsed lungs. And I probably should have died or be paralyzed now, but I believe that God spared me. And not only that, but I just got to experience what it was like to be surrounded by people in real life and across the world who were offering me love and support in tangible and spiritual ways. And so it was a way for me to see how human beings can help one another and do so in the name of God. It was a way for God, I think some people might look at an experience like that and think, well, why didn't God prevent it from happening? Which is a legitimate question. But I just believe that he spared me, and then people who love him served him by loving and supporting me. And it was a profound experience. And I'm here, and I'm walking, and I'm almost completely recovered. And so I'm just filled with gratitude for life and for the giver of life.
Yeah. No, I was going to ask that.
Now, I'm very pleased that you were spared, but I think of the more general situation in our world today, where something like 50,000 children die of starvation, where lots of people pray for diseases to be cured, and they also die. I even remember in 1990, I was in California, actually, at the University of Davis, when there was the San Francisco earthquake, and the Bay Bridge, I think a bus or something went off, and every person but one died. the one person who survived said, "I know God spared me for a purpose. I feel it in me." The next day he died. So I think a lot of the times it's almost like a lottery. You pray to win and you win the lottery, and thank God for it. I think life is hard. Good things happen, lots of bad things happen, and I would like more evidence that there's a God who gives this particular person some special reward while others die in bus accidents. Or is it because God loves you more than he loved those other people who died, or he had a special purpose for you to come and have a discussion with me? I just think that life is hard, and this is what happens, much like a world without any gods, where we have one life to live. We make it very precious. It's not just a dress rehearsal for what happens afterward, and how you behave, or even more important, what you believe tells you whether you go to heaven or hell. I think what we do in this world is the only world we know and what matters, and that's an argument for being as good as we can in this one and only world we have.
When we look at this question of whether society would be better with or without religion, Professor Silverman, I want to start with you here. You give this compelling evidence that atheists can be moral and can care for the world, and you depict a religious world which most of us wouldn't want to live in. Can you point to a moment or an example of an atheist society that arose and endured with an altruistic bent to it? I mean, if we're going to say this is possible, can we see an example of it being lived out?
Well, I wouldn't call it an atheist country. Some of the Scandinavian countries, like Norway, Sweden, that are the least religious, they might have religion, some of them, and those who do pretty much have the kind of religion that I have. If they're Christian, maybe they love Jesus, but they're more involved with social justice, good works, not the kind of religion that's exclusive. I like the religions that are involved with human rights, not the ones that say, my religion is better than yours, you don't worship the right way, let's fight about it. So I would not like, say, the Soviet Union style, or where religion is forbidden. We should have the right to make that choice, but mostly the kinds of choices that are made, I think, that have a better society are those where either there are lots of atheists, humanists, or those who have a religion they don't take too seriously.
Yeah. Now, with Dr. Pryor, on the same question for you, can you point to an example of a religious society where so much religion in society has created something and you're like, hey, I'd like to live in that?
Yeah, I mean, I guess maybe we need to go back to sort of the definition of religion. I mean, I don't think religion is something, I mean, it has been, but it's not something that I would define as it is what it is by how it works and its results, even though we can certainly look at that. I mean, I think religion and belief in God, and for me, Christianity in particular, is about who we are as human beings. I mean, to go back to your point about human suffering, again, what I said in my talk, I mean, the fact that we lament suffering, the fact that we see suffering and that we don't want, that tells us who we are as human beings. I mean, where does that come from? There are no other, I mean, I have 2 dogs that I treat as my children. I love them as my children, and I hate leaving them, and yet, and as wonderful as they are, they don't think about other beings suffering. So to me, religion is answering the question, who are we as human beings, and how and why do we even exist? And for me, that answer is in God. And so the question about suffering is an important one, and I don't have an easy answer. But it also, the flip side of that question and the religion question is, what does it mean to be human? Who are we as human beings? And I don't think we can answer that question satisfactorily without understanding what it is that sets us apart from all the other animals. And to me, it just makes sense that there's something, a creator bigger than ourselves that made us this way, and we reflect him in some way.
Mm-hmm. Well, you mentioned like it's belief, it's not just what works. And I think that's why one way we differ, because for me, what seems to work best in governing a society. And if I have no problems with your beliefs because they seem consistent with I have a loving God who wants me to love my fellow human beings, but religion can be so divisive where in Sweden or the Scandinavian countries, there's just not this animosity toward, say, something as basic as evolution and saying that Jesus wants me to worship this certain way, and if you don't believe, you're going to hell, and you're an infidel, and I need to work hard to right your ways. And I know even like in South Carolina and other southern places, and presumably at Liberty University, you don't teach evolution, or you teach science and evolution, a science that shows that Genesis is correct. And I see overwhelming I'm not a scientism person where everything is found by science, but evolution is overwhelming as the theory of gravity, but usually religious people don't concern themselves with gravity because it doesn't conflict with the Bible, but they do with evolution. And I understand why, because Christianity, it seems to me, is basically about overcoming original sin of Adam and Eve, who took dietary advice from a talking snake, and that's what gave us original sin. And Jesus had to come back to as God to kill himself, to save us from himself. And if we believe this story, then we go to heaven, otherwise we go to hell.
So Dr. Subin, let me follow up on just a little bit, because one of your criticisms of Dr. Pryor's position is more to the effect that Christians want to impose their tradition upon everybody. But it sounds like when you describe your society, it's okay for people to privately hold whatever beliefs they want, but in public, essentially everybody's got to be your worldview, a secular humanist. Is that isn't there a parallel there? That when you point to Scandinavia, you're saying the government is run by secular humanism, people have all sorts of individual beliefs, but isn't that just another form of imposing a worldview?
No, well, I wouldn't say the government is run by secular humanism. I would say they're run for the betterment of the people who live there, and people are free to practice. Just like we have a secular constitution where it doesn't encourage or discourage religion, and that's how I think it should be. That should be a private matter. If people have their religious beliefs, fine, as long as they don't harm others. And when I bring in something like evolution, people may be free to not believe in it, but we shouldn't in our schools teach evolution alongside of creationism and say these are equally valid. Much like I'm not bothered by people who believe in astrology, mostly because they don't have any effect. They're not saying we should teach astrology along with astronomy in our schools. So they're free to read their horoscopes every day and to follow what it says. I think it's silly. There's no evidence for it. There's evidence against it. But as long as they're good people, and there are good people who believe in astrology, and if they're doing human rights and social justice, fine. I'm not so concerned about their beliefs. I'm concerned with their good works, and that's what I look at, the consequences of their actions rather than just their beliefs. I would like everybody to be secular humanists, but I'm happy to work, and I have worked in soup kitchens with Christians and other people who, either because it's the right thing to do or because of their faith, are doing the right things. And I would like to ask Karen a question. That you say you feel you're a better person since you found Christianity. And I understand it might make you...
I don't think I said that.
Oh, okay. Well, you're happier. No, but what I would like to know is how, if you stopped believing in Jesus, how would your behavior toward others be different?
I don't think it would change at all.
Okay. And that's,
I hope.
And that to me is what's important, how we behave toward others. And then your personal beliefs just don't matter so much to me.
And I just need to correct one thing, and I know because there are a couple crazy bloggers out there, the ones calling me demon possessed.
As I said, you're not.
I actually believe what the scripture says about homosexuality. It's just that some people think that I shouldn't be seen in public or
so
be nice
you
to
think
them.
it's a sin, and they...
Like a lot of other things that I do.
So Dr. Pryor, to follow up on this, you make this compelling case of the role that Christ has played in your life and the positive role it has played. Assuming, a society is not comprised of all people with the same faith, how do you think through what the balance should be of both those who are competing faiths and who share versions of your own faith? Because Dr. Silverman has a very clear view. Everybody believes what they want. As long as it doesn't impinge upon others, we're fine. But what's your view for how a diverse society gets along?
Well, I mean, I do think that even as imperfect as it is and as we're developing, I think the American experiment is a good one. I think that we've, a lot of the problems that Herb talked about, which are real problems, prejudice and bigotry against atheists or other kinds of Christians or other religions, we have a long history that goes back to before the founding of this country, and as human beings, we are rooted in our history, and it takes a long time to shake those things and to grow past what needs to be shed, and we're in that process and becoming more tolerant of religious diversity, and I think that's good. And so I think we're learning. I think equality and diversity and free speech helps that a long ways, and I think that we have impulses on both the left and the right to suppress ideas, and I think that harms everyone. I suspect you would agree with me about that.
Yeah, I agree there, but at the same time, like earlier you said about Christianity, how it helped get rid of slavery, and there were some good Christians who were opposed to slavery, but living in South Carolina, I saw why there are Southern Baptists. That's the biggest religion there. Why are there Southern Baptists? They broke from the Northern Baptists over slavery. They stayed for a long time without allowing blacks and whites to marry, or even have blacks drink out of the same water fountains. It took a long progression for things to change. And I talked about good people doing bad things because of religion. You're a good person. On the other hand, frankly, I think...
I'm glad you think so.
I think on one issue, you're a good person doing a bad thing because of religion, and I think that comes to LGBT rights. I think that people are born with orientation, and you mentioned you follow the biblical view, presumably that homosexuality is a sin, and that gay people should be celibate and should not be allowed to marry. I think even some younger evangelicals are moving away, and I'm guessing in another generation or two, people are going to look back and say, what was the issue about LGBT rights and marrying? Just like today, intermarrying of blacks and whites is not considered controversial as it once was.
And Dr. Pryor, I want to give you a chance to respond, but also I want to say we're going to be moving towards the Slido questions. So it is not rude at this point to look at your phone and type something, because it will appear here. But I'll give you a chance here.
Yeah, I mean, I think people, human beings are human beings, and we have wrong ideas and we do wrong behaviors, and then we justify it through our religion. I mean, that's just, it's not just Christians who do that, and it's, and that's just part of being human. And so it's difficult to look past our traditions and to sort truth from culture. That's what it means to be a human being, and it's an ongoing process. So, I mean, I can respect the problems that you look at and point to and their connection to religion, and that's the challenge for us, no matter what our faith is.
To follow up on that, so my students write a lot of spiritual autobiographies. I've read thousands of them. And I would say, while everybody has a different story, one issue that so many people do bring up is the church's stance on LGBTQ rights. And that this was something that in their autobiography they said, this is when I stopped wanting to be associated with the church. The other one is politics. Those two get most brought up. But if Christianity has so much to offer humanity, as I think you demonstrated, are those issues so central that you risk losing a generation? Or is that just a California Christian thing?
No, I mean, I think the issues change throughout different ages, and and God's word doesn't, but our understanding and application does, and it's hard. The thing that one age struggles with is not necessarily the thing that another age struggles with, and I think it's Henry Nouwen who said that if in 100 years Christians are known as the people who don't kill the elderly and children, then we'll be doing pretty well. And I think that's kind of where we are now. I mean, the point of the Abraham and Isaac story, I mean, there are lots of points to it, but one that's always overlooked is the fact that God told Abraham not to do it. But yet here we are, we're willing to kill in many variety of ways, but the God of the Bible said not to.
The God
in that
of,
one.
The God of the Bible first told him to do it just to test his faith. And a secular humanist would say, well, I can't say it in a polite audience, but go do something to yourself. Or I don't believe this because it's just wrong. I have my own morality. The fact that someone is willing to kill somebody they love, not only just a generic human being, because they hear the voice of God, and today still do, is a problem.
And the moral of the lesson was, don't do it.
And still, God needed a blood sacrifice, so he said, don't kill your son, kill this animal instead, and you're part of the Humane Society. I don't know how you deal
So Dr. Silverman, I think your version is the new revised standard of
and
that
by the
story.
way, God did talk to Jephthah, who said, help me win this war, and then I'll kill the first person I see when I go home. Yeah. First person he saw was his daughter, who he killed. And God was fine with that, So a question from the audience here. In one word, are morals relative? Go ahead. Yes, if I'm only allowed one word.
Yeah.
No.
If yes, how can you condemn heinous acts if you can admit that they are relative?
Well, when I said morals are relative, I didn't mean all morals. Okay. There are some, I think, that I would call objective, like we should not kill babies or just be unnecessarily cruel to people. We should not commit genocide. We should not rape, although all of these things do happen to be justified in the Bible. and people
They're
have...
described, but they're not prescribed.
Well, God, I think, committed the ultimate genocide by killing everybody in the world except for one family. That's pretty bad. And he also had Moses and Joshua go to the promised land and commit genocide against all people along the way. And that's what he ordered. So
if we're going to have fairness, though, didn't we have a little bit of a genocide by atheists in...
Yes. I have never said all atheists are good people. I'm not going to justify Stalin or Pol Pot or a lot, but and I pointed in about secular humanism giving human rights. I think today people like the North Korean beloved leader Kim, he's treated as a god, as was his father, and that's a form of religion, even though you might call them atheists, where they wouldn't allow Christians to worship there. So, no, there are lots of bad atheists like that. Atheism is just without a belief in any gods. But then the question is, what do you believe? And there's where humanism comes in.
Yeah. So, Dr. Pryor, so many of the students say, I love Jesus, but I got a problem with Christians. And I've got a problem with the institution of the church. I'm a lover of Jesus, but I got a problem with the church. So many atheists, Dr. Silverman will say, I love atheism, but I got a problem with historical atheists. Is this just a problem with institutions? That, man, the inspiring people within our faith inspire us to do well, but once we start getting together and creating institutions on it, that's when things go wrong?
Okay. Well, I differ from Karen. She loves Christianity. I don't love atheism. I'm an atheist because I see no evidence for the existence of any gods. If
So
I were given
position.
evidence, then I'd start believing in whatever God there was evidence for.
So, but what about you, Dr. Breyer?
Yeah, I mean, I think this is a bad age for institutions. You know, we have pendulum swings throughout human history, and institutions go through times where they have a great deal of power, and then we start to see the problems with that power, and this is actually a good thing. I mean, I've been instrumental within my Southern Baptist denomination in calling out some of the abuses of power in that denomination, and some of the specific leaders in the denomination. And so I don't blame young people or anyone for distrusting institutions. But again, we have to be balanced. I mean, there's a tension, especially as Christians, because the church universal, not an individual church or denomination, but the church is the bride of Christ, and if Christ loves the bride, we need to love her as well, and I'm speaking symbolically here, but some will know what I'm talking about. But I think that love also leads us to question and clean out abuses when they exist. So go, young people, and yeah, hopefully make those institutions better.
I might even mention, like, you're at Liberty University where Jerry Falwell Jr. is president. I remember when Jerry Falwell was president, and he's the one who turned me into a secular humanist. The way he did, you know, in his 1980 book, Listen America, Jerry Falwell listed abortion, pornography, homosexuality, divorce, and secular humanism as the major ills threatening America. That's the first time I heard the phrase secular humanism, and I decided to look it up, and yeah, that seems right for me. And one other thing about...
That's a great story.
And one other thing about Jerry Falwell, you know, somebody said, I don't agree with anything Jerry Falwell ever said, and do you? And that was a challenge, and I thought there was one thing. Because Jerry Falwell said, God doesn't hear the prayers of a Jew. And I agree with him. So, for very different reasons.
Well, let's talk about your institution, though, because You know, I think when many of the California Christians look at the sorts of institutions that make them queasy in regards to pronouncing their faith as an evangelical or even as a Christian, it's liberty. It's the standing up for Trump and standing against LGBTQ rights and a history of racial challenges there. Or at least in going back to,
before the
before the founding.
Okay.
But and so, how do you think through that, even if you don't hold them personally? Yeah. And you know, what do you tell your students about sort of the face of liberty?
Yeah, I mean, I think I look at my own life and the mistakes that I've made and the things that I've learned and the ways that I've grown, and I understand that other people go through that kind of process, and the institutions that are made up of people also go through that kind of process. Also, in terms of just sort of the images that exist of institutions or people from far away. I mean, it's just places are different when you're actually there than what it looks like from one person speaking, whether that's me or our university president. Neither one of us speaks for the university. So I think we all understand that things on the ground look different than they do, magnified on the media. But yeah, I think, if we wait to find a perfect church, we better not go there, because as soon as we enter, it won't be perfect anymore. And the same is true of any institution. And God can use us wherever we are and calls us to different places, and we just need to be faithful.
Cal Poly's perfect, so we're here.
You know what?
Okay,
It looks pretty perfect outside. The weather, I love it.
So Herb, one of the students asks, do humans have inherent worth, intrinsic worth?
Yes.
And if so, does that come from God, or where does that worth come from?
No. No, I mean, we are humans, and I think through an evolutionary process where there was probably a time that people thought we could go out and murder others and had no standards, those genes were not passed on. We're the product of better genes that look toward altruism and cooperation and doing good works. I like the quote from Abraham Lincoln, when I do good, I feel good. When I do bad, I feel bad. That's my religion. And I think we do have inherent worth, and we respect other humans. We may not always respect their opinions, but we listen to their opinions, or should, and weigh them and have discussions about it.
So does that suggest we're genetically predisposed to be ethically aware?
Well, probably more so than species 500,000 years ago, but we are not all. There are psychopaths too who have no ethical views. Just like we have different genes, we have we do have people born homosexual and heterosexual, and probably some of us have genes where it's okay to club a woman over the head and drag her back to the cave, but these are the sorts of views that we fight because we've learned what makes society work better and how to create a livable society, sometimes to go against what your desires are, because you're looking not just for the good for you alone, but for the good of your community.
Dr. Pryor, related to that then, I presume you would say that sense to do good or to recognize when we're not good is God within us. There's a number of questions here about other religious faiths. Do they share a same ability to install goodness in your mind, and how do they differ?
Yeah, I mean, I think there are two main questions that are sort of implicit in a discussion like this tonight. One is theism versus atheism, just that big question. And so I've kind of tried to address that by talking about, I think there's something about human nature that indicates that we reflect a creator God. And then the second direction that question for me would go is, okay, so if there is a God, then what makes me think that Christianity is the truest or the true religion, or the true way of understanding him? And again, it makes sense to me because of the relationship to language, which is rational and logical and orderly, and is a God who reveals himself through language. I think I barely have time to scratch the surface of that thought, but I think it's compelling. I think it's compelling that the Judeo-Christian God is uniquely a God who exists and relates to us through something as concrete and logical as the written word.
May I mention just one phrase that Christians use a lot and are meant to be nice, but Jews generally hate Judeo-Christian God, because Jews had so many centuries of Christian persecution that even the use of the term New Testament, that implies to Jews that, well, that was the Old Testament, this is new. We prefer the Hebrew Bible versus the Christian Bible. And even if you talk about Judeo-Christian, then you're leaving out Muslims, because Muslims also are mentioned, say, the Virgin Mary and all in their holy books, where Jews don't. So why are you saying Jesus would send Christians and maybe even Jews to heaven, but not Muslims? And why is, see, again,
Right.
with all, I look at the good works of
Right,
each,
right.
and which I like, and condemn the bad works.
Well, the Christian Bible consists of both of those parts, so I don't know how to say that, in another way.
No, the
Well, we
Hebrew
accept-
and Christian.
Right,
No,
right,
I
yeah.
understand. I'm not even offended anymore by
Yeah,
Judeo-Christian,
good thing you're
but I
not
know a
Jewish,
lot of
right?
As a secular humanist.
No, I understand that, right? But we just believe, the scriptures that we accept say that Revelation ended at a certain time, and so.
Yeah, but also we Jews killed Jesus, and which was why he came here. So it seems like Jews should be praised for killing Jesus rather than condemned for it. That was something, as a Jew,
Well,
I never quite understood.
It's all God's plan, so nobody gets credit or blame.
So then the Holocaust was God's plan too.
Well, let's, one of the things that both sides can do is to point to representatives on the other side who have done atrocious things. We can just give that. There have been atheists done horrible things. There have been Christians and Jews who've done horrible things, and Muslims and every other tradition out there. I hear Dr. Pryor wanting to distance herself a little bit from the dogmatism that has been kind of the whipping boy of a lot of criticism of contemporary Christianity. We're against this dogmatism. I also, though, hear Dr. Silverman that atheists will be like, man, I am all on board for your criticism of organized religion and of Christianity. But when I hear Sam Harris or Richard Dawkins, they strike me as just as dogmatic as the most dogmatic of the other side. That they will say there is nothing good. There's no difference between Osama bin Laden and Mother Teresa. They're all just hopelessly lost. Do you see on your side that same parallel struggle of, you might say, fundamentalist atheists?
Well, I would say maybe evangelical atheists, perhaps. I wouldn't call them fundamentalists. And also somebody like Richard Dawkins, who's supposed to be the most militant atheist, he'll say there's probably no God. And that, to me, is something relatively humble compared to what I hear from Christians, where there's no doubt not only that there's a God, but there was Jesus who was resurrected, and the only evidence for that is in the Bible, and that was written, the resurrection was years after Jesus died. So I think they will criticize the fact that there's this faith without evidence, rather than saying all Christians are bad, because they don't. So I know both of them, and they won't say all Christians are bad. I think they would say overall Christianity has done more harm than good, and that these are silly beliefs. And sometimes religion was talked in with such respect and in hushed tones than just talking in a normal conversation and criticizing that, just like you might criticize a politician or a restaurant. That's considered in bad taste.
Yeah, so you would say, hey, look, there's a lot more nuance there than the quotes that get put out there.
Right.
As we're wrapping this up, let me give you two scenarios. The next 30 years in America. Scenario one is religion wins. Revival in America, not just among Christians, but among Jews and Muslims. We have a religious environment that is mutually encouraging, and young people are going in droves to churches and synagogues and mosques and temples and other places, for it has become the center of our country. Scenario two is secular humanism wins, and religion is just done at 4:30 before dinner in nursing homes and among just a few older people. How is America different under scenario one than scenario two? Dr. Pryor.
Well, I think we will have lost a lot of what it means to be human. Again, it keeps going back to that question. I think that being human, and even your opening rhetorical question about how would the world be different without, or society be different without religion. Well, again, I think that this ability and desire that we have to worship something greater than ourselves is something that no other form of existence has, and it is a great deal of what makes us human. So I think that that we will have lost a lot, and to be human is a terrifying thing. It is full of potential and full of hazard and risk and danger. And so all of those bad things that we talk about religion causing and all of the good things are just part of what it means to be human. And as risky as it is, I'll take being human any day.
See, I think we would gain being human, recognizing that just having faith that somebody is going to cure all our problems, if not in this world, in the next. So it's okay if there are starving people, because we don't understand God, but it's somehow God's will, and He'll make it right in the next world. We only have one life to live, in my view, and we want to make it right as best we can in this life. And our afterlife is the good works that live on after we die. And I'll even quote a Christian who I think a lot of you have read and like, C.S. Lewis, famous for Mere Christianity. He said, "Why are so many atheists really good people?" And his answer was, they have to be good. If you don't believe in a God who forgives, you are damned to unrelenting goodness. And I'm happy to have unrelenting goodness if I can, even though I'm a failed person, as long as I live.
Well, the truth about time is we need to wrap this up. But I want to give you one final thought to leave us with. And so, Dr. Suleman, do you want to give a thought, and then I'll let
How long do I have for my final thought?
1 minute.
Wow. Okay. Well, you know, my purpose here is not to convert you to atheism. You need to find paths that enable you to live healthy and productive lives and help your fellow human beings. But I do want to encourage you to think critically And some of your questions may have been answered, but I hope you leave with many more questions, because the goal is to think critically. And whatever your beliefs, listen to opposing views and make sure your answers you get make sense. And also try to consider this outsider test, that you should use the same standards of evidence and skepticism in evaluating your own religion as you do when considering other religions. In short, it's kind of like a different golden rule. Do unto your own faith as you would do unto other faiths. And also, let me give you your homework as a former professor, and that's to read 10 books that, not just the Bible, which you should read because it is an important part of our culture, but I have a list of 10 books here, and it's on in the back to read about secular humanism. I'll just tell you the first, A Demon-Haunted World by Carl Sagan, that I think it's good to hear other points of view. And one final thought is, I'd like to thank all of you Christians here, especially Dr. Pryor, for ignoring the words of the Apostle Paul in 2 Corinthians 6:14. The passage says, "Believers must not commune with unbelievers. What fellowship hath righteousness with unrighteousness? Light with darkness? Believers with infidels?" And this infidel thanks all of you for your attention and interest in this important topic.
Okay. All right, a final thought from you, Dr. Pryor. Probably something about reading.
Well, pretty close, yeah. I would just say that wherever you stand on these questions and the issues, please pursue truth, goodness, and beauty, and cultivate your hunger for them, because we are all hungry, and the habits that we form and the practices that we engage in a daily basis, even starting now at this chapter in your lives, sets the stage for the rest of our lives. So think now about truth, goodness, and beauty, and look for their source as well. Thanks.
Well, with that, we're going to wrap up this section. I want to encourage you to make this the beginning of your evening, that hopefully some of the words that were said here today inspires you to have conversations that go long into the night. If anybody needs an excuse for not turning in their homework tomorrow, write me. I will write them. I'm not sure your professors will take them, but if you spend the evening talking about the value of religion in society, I will say this has been a successful event.